Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping making a rare visit to Tibet, but behind the scenes, experts see unusual signs that could signal cracks in his grip on power. The U.S. is investigating a fentanyl hub in Japan linked to a Chinese chemical company and a man known only as Japan Boss. Hundreds of Taiwanese troops training with U.S. forces in Michigan. The drills come as Taiwan ramps up defense spending and strengthens ties with the U.S. Are U.S. tariffs pushing India and China closer? Despite tension since the deadly border clash in 2020, China's foreign minister just met with India's prime minister. An expert breaks down what this means for U.S.-India relations. And China's revenue from property taxes is climbing even as the real estate crisis deepens. But how are homeowners coping? A veteran real estate expert shares insight. Before we dive into today's news, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter using the link down below. In tomorrow's edition, we take a closer look at China's role in supporting Russia's war in Ukraine. It drops Friday morning straight to your inbox. Don't miss it. China's regime leader Xi Jinping returned to Beijing Thursday after his second ever visit to Tibet. It was his most high-profile appearance in months, with lavish receptions and red carpets. Are these lavish displays just for show? Chinese experts point to unusual signs in Xi's visit. In recent months, speculation about Xi Jinping's waning power has been mounting. Observers noted purges of his loyalists, a shrinking personal guard, and surprisingly less coverage in state-run media. But everything seemed to change overnight. Xi made an extravagant appearance in Tibet on Wednesday, waving to state-run media cameras. The event marked the 60th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party's takeover of the Himalayan territory. Almost no Western media were allowed to cover it firsthand. Major outlets like BBC and CNN relied on photos from Beijing, while others used images of Tibet's landscapes. What's more, analysts noticed something unusual. Chinese regime leaders often dye their hair black, but this time Xi appeared with noticeably graying hair. Analyst Jiang Feng says the change could carry a deeper message.
And the CCP's political context, leaders appearing in public with dyed hair is a political convention, much like how they dress. It signals vigor, health, and control of power. But this convention has recently been broken.
Xi Jinping also visited Chinese troops in Tibet, but senior military leaders, including the second-in-command of the Chinese military and the commander of the Tibet theater, both skipped the event. Under typical CCP protocol, such top officials are expected to accompany the head of state. This marks the third time the second-ranking military leader, Zhang Youxia, has skipped Xi's military visits. Zhang is widely seen as a top opponent of Xi. Footage from Chinese state broadcasters shows Xi flanked only by lower-ranking disciplinary officials. Tan Jingyuan, a senior China affairs analyst, weighs in.
Not only was the arrangement far too low in rank, it was completely mismatched. When the head of China's military inspects troops, those accompanying him should be military commanders or senior political officers.
On top of that, a candidate favored by the anti-Xi faction, once nearly pushed to the margins of the regime, was also among the delegation to Tibet. Analysts say such a move would be unlikely if Xi still maintained a tight grip on power. Addressing China's fentanyl exports to the U.S. linked to thousands of American deaths is a key priority for the Trump administration. The U.S. is now investigating a Chinese fentanyl hub in Japan, tracking shipments of fentanyl and its precursors from Wuhan, China, to the United States. According to Japanese news outlet Nikkei, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and the FBI are investigating a fentanyl smuggling operation in Nagoya, Japan, including its hidden distribution channels. Investigators say the operation is tied to Hubei, a Marvel Biotech, a Wuhan-based chemical manufacturer in China. The network is led by a Chinese national known as the Japan Boss. The group manages both distribution and finances for the drugs. U.S. Ambassador to Japan George Glass says the network stretches across multiple countries and calls for international cooperation to stop shipments through Japan. In a previous post on X, Ambassador Glass said the Chinese Communist Party is, quote, deliberately fueling the crisis by trafficking precursor chemicals. President Trump is calling the new trade deal between the U.S. and the European Union the biggest deal ever. On Thursday, the U.S. and EU confirmed the agreement on tariffs and released more details. NTD international correspondent David Yves reports from Paris.
1 month ago, President Trump and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen agreed on a new trade deal. The joint agreement was detailed today by the European Commission. It states that the EU intends to eliminate tariffs on all U.S. industrial goods and provide preferential market access for a wide range of U.S. seafood and agricultural products. Starting September 1, the U.S. will impose a 15% tariff on most European goods, including semiconductors and lumber. In exchange, the EU will scrap tariffs on all U.S. industrial goods, including farm products like fruit, pork, bison, and nuts. The U.S. will only cut tariffs on European cars from 27.5% to 15% once Europe's tariff removal is written into law, according to the deal. Last month, Trump had said that drugs and chips were excluded from the new U.S.-EU trade deal, leaving them open to tariffs as high as 250% and 100%. But new details released today show both will now be capped at 15%, matching other sectors. The agreement also highlights that since the EU and US share one of the largest business relationships in the world, mutual investments would be highly profitable for both parties. As part of this effort, the European Union intends to procure US liquefied natural gas, oil and nuclear energy products with an expected offtake valued at $750 billion through 2028. European companies are also expected to invest an additional $600 billion in strategic sectors in the United States through 2028. In addition, the EU plans to purchase at least $40 billion worth of US AI chips for its computing centers. In a joint statement, the US and EU said this was a first step in a process that could be expanded as the relationship develops. On a final note, this deal can be viewed as an important step in a new US trade policy that is less dependent on China. The deal layers the World Trade Organization, which President Trump has long said has been too one-sided with China with its policies and arbitrage. These remarks echoes the word of the EU Commission President in June when she addressed the possibility of creating a new WTO based on freer trade rules. David Yves, NTD News, Paris.
More than 500 Taiwanese troops headed to the U.S. this month to take part in this year's Northern Strike military exercise held at Lake Michigan. For the first time, the exercises shifted focus from Europe to the Indo-Pacific, simulating a potential conflict in Asia. The drills brought together 7,500 troops from 36 U.S. states and 9 international partners. The exercises involved every branch of the U.S. military except the Space Force. They also mixed National Guard and reserve units with active duty forces. Officials say these troops, who usually train in the U.S., could be called on for large-scale conflicts in Asia. Taiwan's involvement is being highlighted publicly for the first time, but the island has actually been a U.S. partner in the exercises since 2021. Taiwanese analysts say the two militaries have been steadily working closer together. China has responded with a warning. Its embassy in Washington, D.C. told Newsweek that the cooperation could spark conflict in the Taiwan Strait. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has reportedly vowed to seize Taiwan by 2027. On Tuesday, Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs stressed that the island must ultimately rely on itself for defense. The statement comes after President Trump claimed that Xi told him China would not invade Taiwan while he was in office. The U.S. is Taiwan's biggest supporter and arms supplier, even though the two don't have formal diplomatic ties or a defense treaty. Under the Taiwan Relations Act, Washington is required to provide Taiwan with a means to defend itself. But the law doesn't specify whether the U.S. would send troops if China attacks. Taiwan plans to raise defense spending by 20% next year, pushing it past 3% of GDP for the first time since 2009. Officials say the boost is meant to strengthen the island's defenses against China. Taiwan's premier says the 2026 budget would exceed $31 billion, with extra funds for new fighter jets and stronger naval defenses. For the first time, Coast Guard funding will also be included in the defense budget. Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te has made military modernization a top priority, including developing homegrown submarines. Taiwan's government says the spending increases are a direct response to China's growing military and political pressure. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he doesn't want China involved in guaranteeing Ukraine's security. Speaking to French news outlet AFP on Thursday, Zelenskyy accused Beijing of siding with Russia. He criticized China's refusal to help end the war and its supply of drones to Moscow. Zelenskyy said that given China's role in the conflict, it shouldn't be part of any security framework for Ukraine. The U.S. is set to impose a 50% tariff on Indian imports starting August 27th, including a 25% penalty tied to Russian oil purchases. Could this push India closer to America's rival China? China's foreign minister just met with India's prime minister this week. Are relations thawing between China and India? We speak with Cleo Pascal, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, for insight. Cleo Pascal, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Always great to see you. Thank you very much for having me.
We are seeing India's Prime Minister Modi. He just met with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and he's also set to go visit China and visit Xi Jinping at the end of this month. That's part of a whole cooperation. Now, that would be his first visit there in 7 years. So given all of this, how should we read this? Is this a thawing in relations between the two sides, especially since that deadly border clash in 2020?
It's certainly a shift. It is definitely a change. The Indian strategic community and much of the Indian is furious about how they've been perceived to be treated, especially around this tariff issue. But also, a lot of the tweets have seemed quite personal, including the one from President Trump, where he says that India is a dead economy, which is just kind of not the case. And I think there was a lot of hope within India that Trump 2 would be more like Trump 1, where there were very, very good talks, including big events like Howdy Modi and just really close people-to-people ties, but also strategic ties. So I think there's part of it is just coming as a shock, and that's created anger, confusion, and real direction of the relationship.
When it comes to the cards, as President Trump likes to say, who has the cards, we are seeing news that China is actually letting in more rare earth or fertilizer to India. That was one of the contention points about a month ago. How are you reading that? Does China have the cards in terms of that relationship with India?
Well, it does until somebody else comes up and helps. And but of course, if you're creating those dependencies, then that's another card you have to play. You can then cut off those supplies. And we talk a lot about Sun Tzu's Art of War, but the Indian strategic text from around the same period is called the Arthashastra, and that's where the idea of my enemy's enemies, my friend, comes from. But that matrix is actually even more complicated in that strategic text. So I think that they're playing that game. While the global sphere is readjusting. There's been a very confusing, in some cases, seeming disaggregation of the economic from the strategic, but in most places there's an understanding that it is heavily interlinked. So that's why the messages coming out of Washington are confusing, and that's kind of throwing the cards up in the air a little bit, and then people are grabbing whatever cards they can to improve their position while things reset.
On that note, we do see, China and Russia and India are all part of the BRICS summit, which is trying to pull away from U.S. hegemony, if you will, especially in the economic sector. But at the same time, in terms of India, you're seeing the new iPhones being made there. That's kind of pulling away from the China market. But at the same time, you also have, say, India banning TikTok and all of these Chinese apps. So there's that whole ideological angle at play as well. Given all these intricacies, what do all of these movements mean for the U.S.-India relationship under Trump 2.0?
Oh, that's kind of what we're going to, and really there is a lot of confusion because India was hit with very high tariffs, more than China. And if you look at the Indian Twitter sphere, it is very angry. But then things happen like the iPhones start getting manufactured in India, and what you'll find is the last time that happened, I mean, when there was the own parts manufacturing plant in Bangalore that was attacked by kind of a labor movement, which seemed to ultimately track back to China, you start to see this whole undercurrent of political warfare to try to break those kinds of ties. And there's a question about whether at the top level, some of the things that are happening to break that or fracture that U.S.-India relationship is actually part of a political warfare operation by Russia or China or others as well. So I think sort of digging down and seeing what's going to over the long run is something that is very warranted. Currently, things are not going great, and the messages not hostile, and so things are starting to shift a little bit. But over the long run, the things that build relations, cooperation, or economic cooperation between the U.S. and India, and people-to-people ties, all that sort of stuff, the fundamentals are good. But there will be efforts made by lobbies in the U.S. and in India and elsewhere to try to make the top-line fractures go as deep as possible, so that even past Trump 2.0, close U.S.-India relationship becomes more difficult.
Cleo Pascal, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, China's revenue from property taxes is climbing even as the real estate crisis deepens. But how are homeowners coping? A veteran real estate expert shares insight. And at least 39 schools across Taiwan have reportedly set up Communist Party-style clubs. Taiwanese officials warn young people to see the difference between utopian ideals and the harsh realities of totalitarian rule.
The reality of communist rule and the ideal communist society are two completely different things.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China's finance ministry reports it collected 12% more in property taxes during the first half of the year compared with the same period last year. This comes amid a deepening real estate crisis. How are Chinese homeowners feeling, and what's next for the country's housing market? NTD's Flora Hua has the report.
China's finance ministry says the rise in tax revenue, despite the market slump, comes from stricter measures targeting local homeowners. The country's housing market crisis has hit local finances hard as property taxes from developers have dried up. But as of the end of June, taxes collected from homeowners have brought in roughly $36.7 billion. That's helping ease some of the pressure on local budgets.
For homeowners, their property has turned into a continuous financial burden. This is blatant plunder, eroding the accumulated wealth of the middle class and affluent families year after year.
Hu Liren, a native of Shanghai, has over 3 decades of experience in China's real estate sector.
This isn't just an economic policy adjustment. It's a power-driven plan to redistribute wealth. The real goal isn't to create a healthy property market, but to make sure wealth no longer stays with the people and ends up permanently concentrated in the hands of the dictator.
According to a state-run website, China plans to roll out new rental regulations soon. The policy is set to target misconduct in the rental market. Regulators will require landlords to provide detailed information on leases and rental properties. The announcement quickly sparked heated online discussions, with many fearing it could signal the start of more housing taxes.
Over the past 20 years, real estate in China has been the cornerstone of household wealth. Once people achieve economic independence, they naturally begin demanding greater rights. And sooner or later, that leads to calls for political independence, something a dictatorship cannot tolerate.
When it comes to China's property taxes, Hu believes the issue stems from the way the Chinese Communist Party rules. Empty residential buildings are casting a chilling effect across many Chinese cities, and tougher tax rules could push even more people out of the housing market. Flora Hua, NTD News.
A new poll from Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council shows about 2/3 of respondents say the Chinese Communist Party's infiltration of Taiwan is getting worse. The concern is picking up after Taiwanese media reports of communist clubs popping up in high schools across the island. According to a cross-campus organization's website, at least 39 schools across Taiwan have reportedly set up Communist Party clubs. Some even have formal roles like general secretaries and other committees. Taiwanese officials are taking quick action.
The humanitarianism and utopian ideals promoted by communism can easily attract young people. But in reality, theory and practice are worlds apart. I hope young people take the time to study the history of the CCP and the international communist movement. The reality of communist rule is very different from the ideal of a communist society.
Taiwanese law currently allows political parties to register under the Communist Party name, but authorities are urging young people to learn more about history. Taiwan's Ministry of Education has also been called on to step in.
As for young people drawn to utopian ideals, we won't view it from a legal perspective. Instead, it's up to Taiwan's Ministry of Education and local education bureaus to look into the situation.
When it comes to the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and the global communist movement, the Epoch Times has released a series of books, including the widely circulated 9 commentaries on the Communist Party and how the specter of communism is ruling our world. These books examine communism's history and its impact around the world. New polling from Taiwan shows rising concern about Beijing's influence. The latest survey by Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council finds that about 2/3 of respondents say the Chinese Communist Party's infiltration of Taiwan is becoming increasingly serious. Let's take a look at a few more figures showing how the Taiwanese public views the Chinese regime. About 86% of the public in Taiwan say they support their government's policy of broadly maintaining the status quo with China. At the same time, nearly 84% of people in Taiwan reject China's one country, two systems plan. That's Beijing's idea to control Taiwan while letting it keep its own system, similar to Hong Kong and Macau. About 74% of people in Taiwan believe that Taiwan and China are separate and not subordinate to one another. Nearly 75% of Taiwanese oppose military, government, or school officials holding Chinese IDs. When it comes to travel, about 2/3 support requiring civil servants to get approval before visiting China, Hong Kong, or Macau. And nearly 67% of people in Taiwan back stricter government checks on Chinese nationals applying for exchange programs. And that's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.